This is 1.4 quadratics part 1. All right, we split it up into 2 parts for a couple of reasons. 1, today's an early release, and then 2, it was just kind of a lot of information at one time. So today we're going to talk about factoring, which we've talked about since the day we got in here. And we're also going to talk about completing the square. All right, you're going to have a variety of questions. If a question on a test says solve, you can use whatever method you want. Factoring, completing the square, quadratic formula. Some of the questions will say solve by completing the square. I don't care if you give me the correct answer if you don't use the proper technique. You have to follow the directions. Does everyone understand that? Okay. So factoring, we talked about a bunch, which I'll go over in one more example. Then today we're going to focus on just completing the square. I think I have like 8 or 10 examples I just want to do. And then tomorrow we're going to actually use the quadratic formula. So some of you can go ahead and get most of your homework done because you guys are familiar with the quadratic formula, or you can wait and do it tomorrow afternoon. So let's talk about what a quadratic is. First of all, a quadratic is a polynomial that the highest degree, the highest exponent is x squared. Does everyone see that? Right, x squared. Whoops, wrong color. X squared is our highest exponent. You need to have your quadratic before you do anything, before you solve using the quadratic formula, before you factor, before you complete the square. It has to be in what's called standard form, meaning ax squared, the number in front of x squared is your a. Then you have bx, so the number in front of the number in front of x is your b term, and then your c. All of those things have to be on one side of the equal sign. If they're not, you need to get them all on the one side first. All right, you might have some problems that's like x squared plus 17, right? There's no b term here. So if you were to say a is 1, b is 0, because there isn't one, and c is 17. But you always want to be able to identify your a, b, and c, and you want everything on one side of the equal sign and then set equal to 0. Does everybody understand what I mean by that? All right, so if you have a question like this, it says solve the equation by factoring. That's the way you need to solve this equation. Before you start factoring this, guys, everything needs to be on one side of the equal sign. Is it? No. So you need to take this 24 and move it over here. So I have x squared plus 5x. When I move positive 24 to the other side, what does it become? So minus negative 24, good, equals 0. So you guys all know how to factor. This is a really easy one. What are the factors of 24? Negative 24. That multiply to give me negative 24, but add to give me 5. What are they? 8 and 3. What kind of 8? What kind of 3? Positive 8, negative 3. Okay. Equals 0. So you guys have factored this. Now you need to solve it, meaning you say each parenthesis equal to 0. So you have x equals negative 8 and x equals positive 3. 2 solutions. You know you have 2 solutions because your highest exponent is x squared. Now, as we go through this, guys, we're going to start getting into some imaginary stuff. So these are real solutions. You can also have imaginary solutions. We're going to get to that in a minute. So you need to make sure that you're paying attention to signs. It's very important. But what this is saying is there's 2 places on the x-axis where this parabola goes through. It goes through at x equals negative 8 and x equals positive 3. These are x-intercepts, solutions, roots. You can say all of those things are interchangeable for what x equals. So everybody with me? Yep. All right, now we're going to talk about completing the square. At first, this can seem like, what? And then as soon as you guys do it a bunch of times, you'll see, oh, it's the exact same thing every time. When you complete the square, there's a process. Let's look at our letter A. Okay, letter A says x squared minus 8x plus 13 equals 0. So the first thing I would do, personally, is I always try to factor everything. If all the directions were to say solve, I would, okay, let me try and factor it. This doesn't factor. So then you have 2 options left. You can complete the square, or you can use the quadratic formula. In this case, it's telling you to complete the square. So this is going to be how you do this every single time. First thing you do is check to make sure everything is on one side of the equal sign. X squared, then x, then a constant. Equals 0, yes? Okay. Now check to see that your leading coefficient is a positive 1. The number in front of x squared is a positive 1. Is it? Okay, we're good to go then. So this is the process of completing the square. Follow along with me. After we do a couple, you guys will be good. You want to get your variables together. So you have x squared minus 8x. Everybody with me? And then you want to move your constant to the other side. So positive 13 becomes negative 13. Now we are completing the square, and I'll show you what that means in just a second. But you're going to put plus a square here. And what you do to one side, you do where? So I'm going to put plus square here. Now what happens, guys, when you square a negative number? Becomes positive. So this is always going to be positive. Remember that. It's always going to be positive. So now you're like, okay, well now what? All right, we have everything set up. Now this is super easy. Everything is dependent upon your b term. What's my b term? Negative 8. So you're going to take this negative 8. You say negative 8 divided by 2. This is going to tell us everything we need to know. What's negative 8 divided by 2? Negative 4. So over here on the left-hand side, you have created a parenthesis. We're at x in the front. And what do you think goes inside that parenthesis? Not positive. Negative 4. And we're completing this square, so we're going to square this. Now we have to figure out what goes in both of those squares. Well, what did I tell you you're going to do to this number? Square it. What is negative 4 squared? 16. What you do to one side of the equation, you do where? To the other. So what's negative 13 plus 16? 3. If you notice, guys, what you just did, this is a perfect square trinomial now. X squared minus 8x plus 16 is the exact same thing as x minus 4 times x minus 4. If you were to multiply x minus 4 times x minus 4, you'd get x squared minus 8x plus 16. You created a perfect square trinomial. So now you have two things left to do, and these last two things will be the same every single time. You're trying to get x all by itself. So when you try to get x all by itself, what do? Take the square root. So if I take the square root of this side, what am I left with? X minus 4. Well, what you do to one side, you do where? To the other. So I take the square root of 3. I don't know what it is. But when I put the square root on, what goes in front of my answer? Plus minus. And then I have one more step to get x all by itself. Add 4. Now, you can put this either way. I like to write the whole number and then plus or minus the square root. If you do it the other way, that's fine. You just have to have plus or minus the square root of whatever the number is. And then make sure the 4 is outside of the square root. But here are your two answers. Generally, we use completing the square when stuff doesn't factor because you get answers like this. You can't figure this out in your head. But if your problem just says solve, try to factor it first if you can. But if you can't, then you can use completing the square. Or if you use the quadratic formula, you've gotten the same thing. But every single time, this process is the same. You get your letters together, you move the constant to the other side, and then you take that b term, you cut it in half, and then you figure out what goes in your parentheses and all that. So we're just going to do a bunch of these together. Might be helpful to watch this tonight when you get home to kind of reinforce it. All right, let's look at B. B says 3x squared minus 12x plus 6 equals 0. All right, first and foremost, guys, are we in standard form? Yeah. Is my leading coefficient positive 1? No. Uh-oh. If for some reason you guys get one and it's not a positive 1, I guarantee you I gave you a problem that has a GCF that you can take out. What can I divide out of 3x squared, negative 12x, and 6? Take out a 3. So I'm left with x squared minus 4x plus 2, right? Now, guys, think about this. At the end, I have to set everything equal to 0, right? Does 3 ever equal 0? No, so you don't have to worry about it. If there was an x with it, yes, you do. But if you just take out a number, don't even worry about it. So now, in my mind, if I was just going to solve this, I'd say, oh, does this factor? It doesn't. So this tells us to complete the square. Okay, that means we keep our letters together. So I have x squared minus 4x. Then I put plus a what? Plus the box or a square. And then what do I do with this positive 2? I move it over, it becomes minus 2, and then what you do to one side, guys, you have to do where? To the other. You have to have it balanced. So now exactly the same thing that we just did. I'm going to get my parenthesis ready because I know I'm going to have a parenthesis with an x in the front, and this is going to be squared. I take that b term. What is negative 4 divided by 2? Negative 2. So what goes inside my parenthesis? Minus 2. Good. Now remember, this is plus whatever the number is squared. So you take negative 2 and do what? Square it. Becomes what? What you do to one side, you do to the? Perfect. So what's negative 2 plus 4? 2. And now there's 2 more steps, and it's the same thing we did in the last problem. How do you get x all by itself? Take the square root. Do you know what the square root of 2 is? No, it doesn't break down or anything, so just leave it. What goes in front of your square root of 2? Plus or minus, good. And then my last thing? Add 2. So what this says is this parabola crosses the x-axis at 2 plus the square root of 2 and 2 minus the square root of 2. I'm not asking you guys to graph this or anything. We're just solving algebraically. 90% of the time when I tell you to complete the square, it's going to come out with a yucky answer like this. You'll see a couple examples we do that come out nice and pretty. And the reason why is because they factor. But again, if the directions tell you you have to use completing the square, then this is what you need to do. If it just says solve it, try to factor it first. Let's do these next examples together. You guys have all these? If you want to change every variable to x, feel free, it doesn't matter. But it says solve each equation by completing the square, so that's exactly what we're going to do. First thing I look at is, am I in standard form? Everything's on the left-hand side equal to 0, yes? Okay. Is my leading coefficient positive 1? All right, we're good to go. So get your letters together. I have p squared plus 14p. What do I have to do with negative 38? Okay, move it to the other side, so I add it. Now what goes in those gaps? I need plus a square. And what you do to one side, you do to the other. So get your parenthesis over here set up. How do I know what goes in my parenthesis? Divide the middle term by 2. So 14 divided by 2 is? 7. So plus 7.
You always divide it by 2?
Always. Yep. And then what do I do? How do I get the number that goes in the box? You square it because we're completing the square. So add 49 here. And I add 49 here. So 38 plus 49, 87. Okay. Whoops. Skipped us up. 87. Last 2 steps are the exact same thing. What do? Take the square root. So I have p plus 7 equals what? Plus or minus. Very good. 87. And then? Subtract 7. Great. So p equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 87. Now, what should I check? I can't plug that back in, and I mean, you could, but we're not going to do that right now. All right, guys, what should I check? What do you think? What do you think I'm going to tell you might want to take a look at? If 87 breaks down, boys. Does 87 break down? All right, let's just look. From now on, it's not going to be, should I break this down? You guys always need to try and break down. So how do we do that? Let's remind ourselves how we do that. We have 87. 2 doesn't go into 87, but does 3? How do you know? What's 8 plus 7? 15. Does 3 go into 15? Yeah, so 3 goes into 8 2 times with 2 left over, right? 3 goes into 27 9 times. Does square root of 87 break down? No. So you guys are fine. -7 plus or minus square root of 87. That's fine. These answers generally are not going to be nice and pretty. But the process of completing the square is exactly the same. All right, first thing you would try to do if it just said solve was, okay, factors of 59. That multiply to give me 59, add to give me 6. No, not going to work. It tells us to complete the square anyways. So let's get our problem set up. I'm going to keep my letters together. So I have v squared plus 6v. What do I do with this 59? Move it to the other side. Great. Now I have to put plus a square and plus a square. Good. Every time is the same thing. All right, so get this side set up. I have v, I know this is going to be squared. How do I figure out what goes inside of my square? V term divided by 2, which gives me positive 3. So I have plus 3 right here. And then what goes inside?
9.
Where'd you get 9 from?
3 squared.
I like the confidence there. Good. What's 59 and 9?
68.
Good. Now, there's 2 more steps, and it's the same thing that we did 27 times already. How do I get v by itself? Take the square root. So I have v plus 3. What goes in front of square root of 68? Plus or minus. Good. And the last thing is?
Subtract the 3.
Subtract the 3. So I have -3 plus minus square root 68. What should I check? Let's check to see if 68 breaks down. So 2. Uh-oh, it does. What does that break down to? 2 square root of 17. So your answer is v equals -3 plus minus 2 root 17. You cannot put -3 and 2 together because that says 2 square root of 17. It's like different last names there. They're not the same thing. We okay? You guys doing great. 15 minutes. I'm not going anywhere. You're okay. All right, look at the next one. See if you guys notice anything. We're going to complete the square, but does anybody know what times what gives you 51?
1 times 50.
1 times 51, yeah. What about 3?
No, wait.
17.
3 and 17. Is there some way that you could combine 3 and 17 to give you a -51 when you add, but a positive 14? This one factors. So what I'm showing you guys is when I personally give you a completing the square problem, it will probably end up with an answer like this because I want you guys to use completing the square. But if you're just given a problem and it just says solve, don't automatically jump to, I got to use the quadratic formula. Or I have to complete the square. If something factors, factor it. It's easier. Now, the directions here aren't solve. It just says solve by completing the square. So I'm going to show you what one would look like because there might be some on web or something like this. So we're going to get our a's together. A squared plus 14a plus my square. I move 51 to the other side, becomes positive, and I have plus a square, right? So get your parentheses set up. A is going to be in the front. Something is squared. Now let's figure out what goes in the parenthesis and what goes in the squares. How do I figure that out? I divide my b term by 2. What is 14 divided by 2? I have positive 7. Good. Now how do I figure out what goes in the squares? 49 on both sides. Good. Guys, when you add 51 and 49, what do you get? 100. Now, this is a very simple problem, but it can be a little confusing when you get to this point because you guys are used to seeing square roots. How do you get a by itself? You take the square root. So I have a plus 7 equals what? Plus or minus 10. And then do what? Minus 7. So a equals -7 plus or minus 10. You cannot leave your answer like that, guys. That's 2 little math problems. This says a equals -7 plus 10. And this says a equals -7 minus 10. What's -7 plus 10? 3. What's -7 minus 10? -17. When something factors nice and pretty, if you do completing the square, you'll get a nice pretty answer. If you were to use the quadratic formula, you would have gotten the same pretty answer. So that's why I'm saying if it tells you all you have to do is solve it, just solve it. Don't worry about a specific method. Try to factor first. If you can, it makes life easy. All right, let's go through this one a little quicker. We're set up fine. Everything's where it needs to be. My coefficient of x squared is positive 1, so get your x's together. X squared minus 12x. I move this 11 over, it becomes negative 11. So if I add a square here, I have to add a square here. Samesies, right? All right, so get your parentheses set up. How do I figure out what goes in that parenthesis? Divide this by 2, I get negative 6. So negative 6 goes here. And then remember, when you complete that square, you have to square the number. If I square negative 6, what do I get?
36.
Positive 36. Great. What you do to one side, you do to the other. And what's negative 11 plus 36? 25. So this is going to be another one that comes out pretty. Two things you have to do is take the square root and move the 6 over. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. X minus 6 equals what? Plus or minus 5. Good. And then the last thing we're going to do is add 6. So this is x equals 6 plus or minus 5, which is really saying 6 plus 5 and 6 minus 5. What's 6 plus 5?
11.
And what's 6 minus 5? There you go. Does that make sense? Factors of 11 that multiply to give you 11, but add to give you negative 12? Yep. You get negative 11, negative 1. Then when you solve it, you get 11 and 1. Good job. Two more. You guys have these changes on your notes, right?
Yeah.
Yours says minus 10. What's up? All right. This one's not going to be pretty. If you just look at this, are there factors of negative 10? They're going to multiply to give you negative 10, but add to give you 6? No. So let's complete the square. Tomorrow we will work on quadratic formula. So I have x squared plus 6x plus a what? Yep. What do I do with negative 10? Put it to the other side. Becomes positive. Good. This becomes very redundant. The same exact thing. So get your parentheses set up. X in the front. And you know it's going to be squared. So in order to get my inside parentheses, I'm going to take that b term, which is 6, and divide it by 2 gives me 3. So I have plus 3 inside here. And then I have to square. Good job. So 9 and 9. What's 10 plus 9? 19. I got 2 more things I need to do. How do I solve? Take the square root. X plus 3 equals plus or minus square root 19. Good. And then what? Perfect. Minus 3 from both sides. So x equals negative 3 plus minus square root 19. And square root 19 doesn't break down. So there you go. This isn't awful. It's just kind of tedious. But after you do it a few times, you kind of get the hang of it. Again, on Friday, we're going to go over your WebAssign and just do a bunch of practice problems to kind of get the hang of this. You guys need to really work on your fluency, meaning you can do this a little quicker, because if you get 10 problems on a test, you need to be able to finish all 10 of them. So again, check. Are we in standard form? Everything's on the left-hand side. We're set equal to 0. Yes. Is my leading coefficient positive 1? Yes. So here we go. Get your letters together. N squared minus 2n plus square equals, move that negative 13 over. It becomes positive 13 plus square. So if we get our parentheses set up, I know it's going to have an n in the front, and it's going to be squared. So figure out what goes there. I'm going to take this middle term and divide it, by 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 gives me negative 1. So a minus 1 is going to go here. And remember, guys, when you square a negative number, it becomes positive. So I have 1 here and a 1 here. So 13 plus 1 is 14. Last 2 steps are the exact same. What do I do? Take the square root. So n minus 1 equals plus minus, right? Square root of 14. Does 14 break down? No, it's just 1, 2, 7, and 14. Right? If I say 14, 2 goes to 7, so it doesn't break down. What's the last thing I need to do?
Add 1.
Add 1. So n equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 14. And there's your answer. How do we feel? It's not awful. It's not everyone's favorite, and that's fine. But it's not awful. So tonight, go ahead and get started on your website. Like I said, some of the problems, you guys know the quadratic formula. Go ahead and work on those too. But you have tonight and tomorrow night to get that web assigned done. We're going to finish up part 2 tomorrow, and then we're going to practice on Friday.